disagreements, clarifications?
I suppose I can talk to you for a few minutes, Darth. How's it going?
Sure. Oh, not you.
No, it's me. It's Isaac. It's Ask Yourself.
Not you.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. For a sec, I thought maybe you
I'm just,
mistook me.
I'm just busting your chops.
Nah, it's all good. Well,
You got to remember, one of the cultists was impersonating you the other day.
I mean, people
Wait, what?
do impersonate me sometimes. There's not much I can do about it.
Yeah, one of the Angstrike cultists was impersonating. Ask Yourself.
Yeah, I mean,
trying to get information from me.
If I see someone trying to run an alt account, like, I will, try to do something about it. But you can only do so much. Well, okay, I know you want to go, so I'll be kind of quick. So, you and I have obviously talked before. We seem to get to the same, like, general problem pretty much every time. So, I mean, I guess I can just let you run your reasoning, but if you want, I can kind of tell you where I'm at before you do that.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I understand generally what your argument tries to do. Like, I've listened to you argue a good chunk of times. You basically try to say when people are making statements, those statements assume certain fundamental things to be true, like, the validity of logic or the reliability of sense perception or any amount of things like this. And if they can't actually establish that those things are true, then really all they're doing when they're talking is just voicing perspectives that are grounded in their imagination. They're not really saying things that they know to be true. They're just kind of imagining at you. But
they've embraced it. They've embraced complete relativism.
Right, and the solution that you propose is, if we accept the Christian God, that will somehow, and this is the part where I get confused, so that's the somehow, that will somehow actually ground these sort of fundamental, I don't know what to call them, like fundamental beliefs, and then we won't have the problem. So where I'm at, I could like haggle with you over which of those beliefs are fundamental and which of them are justified or not justified. But what I'm inclined to do is just grant that there's certain beliefs that I have that I can't justify, and just ask how exactly the Christian God solves that.
He solves it in virtue of his property set, which includes his creative acts and his plan for human history.
So I'm not.
So.
Well, you can go ahead. I'm not sure I understand that. Like, if you want
and by the way, my position and the transcendental position is not, and I'm not suggesting this to you, but other critics of the transcendental argument, they latch on to certain things that Bonson or Van Til says, saying, we presuppose God. Well, what they don't understand is what they're referring to is we accept not simply the existence of the Christian God, but that we know this in virtue of his actual revelatory actions, his self-disclosure in human history. Otherwise, we would not know of the existence of the Christian God. So we're not simply saying is, you can only have intelligibility if you merely acquiesce that the Christian God exists, but that's not the Christian position, because the Christian position isn't simply that the Christian God exists, it's that the Christian God is revelatory. And he's given self-disclosure of his existence and about his nature and about his plan, about what the nature of reality is. And without starting with the self-disclosure of the Christian God, his revelation, there will be no basis for intelligibility. None.
Okay, so. Okay, well, I guess it's hard to even know where to start with that. So, okay, first I'll make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're just offering some kind of clarification. You're saying, let's just call, I don't know if you have a better term. I don't know if you like the term transcendentals or fundamental propositions or what you want to call these things, like, the laws of logic, the validity of sense perception. I'll just call them fundamental propositions for now. You can change that if you want. So you're clarifying, correct me if I'm wrong, that those fundamental propositions, presuppositionalists are not just saying they're justified because God exists or because you acquiesce to the fact that he exists. somehow some kind of proposition about him being revelatory is also part of how those things are justified. You're saying something kind
Absolutely.
of like
That cannot be disconnected from it. In other words, when we must include God's existence because of his revelatory actions.
Okay, so if we
without which it would be meaningless. You wouldn't be speaking of the Christian God.
Okay, so would it be accurate to say that you think that from the propositions God exists and God is revelatory, we'd be able to ground all of those fundamental propositions?
Say that again?
So the fundamental propositions, or transcendentals, whatever you want to call them, we're talking about things like the laws of logic, the validity of sense perception, the uniformity of causation, whatever you want to invoke there. So I'm asking if you think that those transcendentals, fundamental propositions, if they can be justified as long as we're on board with the two propositions that God exists and that God is revelatory.
Well, we just don't start at any one point. It's not block by block, okay? It's what Van Til calls spiral reasoning, okay? We can start with some proximate starting points, but that's not going to be our ultimate starting point. The ultimate starting point, of course, will be God. But I can start with the proximate position, that I exist, that I can reason, that I have basic reliability of sense perception and those things, and that those are only meaningful and intelligible in virtue of God's revelatory actions. So we're not doing this block by block. What we're saying is the Christian worldview is a system, and it has to be presented as a system. Now, we can sit down in a cup of coffee. We can talk about this block or that block over here, but no block presented is unrelated and self-sustaining without the other.
Sorry to be pedantic. By block, are we just talking about propositions?
I'm just talking about, block. Yeah, when I say block by block, I'm talking about the various tenets within the Christian worldview. Yeah. For example, evidentialists will say, okay, we start with this block. We start with the reality of the external physical world. Then we go on from there to the next block, the uniformity of nature. And then ultimately we end up with the Christian God. Van Til called that the blockhouse mentality.
Okay, so
and he said, yeah, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead. It's fine.
And Van Til says that is not what we do. Okay.
Okay. So
we whatever fact that we come up with, we realize that it can only exist and have intelligibility.
You cut out. It can only exist and have intelligibility.
Because it is connected and related to God as the ultimate starting point. Okay?
Okay.
So we can have proximate starting points. So, for example, if somebody says, well, how do you know God exists? You have to have sense perception. Yeah, okay. I can have a proximate starting point I have sense perception. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that I could know that is if God constructed a world to make me have that.
No.
So it all comes down to God's revelatory actions, and God's revelatory actions are not limited to his audible communications to Adam and Eve or Noah or Moses, although that's included. They include the very foundational framework by which I can see things or reason.
Okay, so just a little point of clarification. So when you say things like blocks or points, like I'm just taking that to mean propositions, like just sentences that are capable of having truth value.
Yes.
Like so something like the universe, the causation is uniform, or the external world exists. Like those are, I just think propositions is fine for me there.
Right.
So we're not okay. I just
there cannot be
difference.
There cannot be any singular block that is unrelated or unconnected to the whole and to God.
Okay, all right. So let's see if we can clear up where exactly we're disagreeing. So I think that the main point that I'm having trouble getting on board with is that somehow God is able to give us grounding for, all of these fundamental propositions. I guess that I would just need to be walked through like why exactly that is the case, like how we get from some proposition about God existing or some cluster of propositions like he exists, he's revelatory, whatever else you want to throw in there, how that takes us to one of these fundamental propositions, like about the laws of logic or the uniformity of causation being true. Like, here's a way we can do it. If you want to run your reasoning on me and isolate like some kind of thing that I'm not able to justify, and then show me how God solves it, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, I'll say the triune God of the Christian scriptures exists, and we know this in virtue of his revelatory actions through the course of creation and human history. And the denial of God's self-disclosure and his revelatory actions results in catastrophic incoherence.
Okay, so there's a few
Christianity is true. Christianity is true due to the impossibility of its denial.
Okay, so
Christianity would have to be true even in order to attempt to deny or affirm anything.
Okay, now here's where we're gonna possibly run into a problem. So, well, there's a few things that I could pick on there. So I'm inclined to say that, I don't deny that God exists. I also don't affirm that he exists. I'm agnostic. Now, I know that you think that's an incoherent position. I don't actually agree that that's incoherent. So we could go down that road if we want to, or I could just object to certain things you said in there. Like, for example, one of the propositions...
Okay, so your position...
Just let me finish one thing, then you can continue,
sure.
Of course. One of the propositions you said in there was just that, like, we know the Christian worldview is true. Like, I don't actually believe that currently. So you can, go on whatever you want there.
Okay, so everybody has a worldview. Okay.
What do we mean? Sorry to cut you off. Just clarity question. How exactly do you mean the word worldview?
Means your set of interconnected, interrelated beliefs.
Okay, sure.
That you use to filter and interpret, all facts, and including your most foundational commitment as to the nature of all dependent facts.
Yeah, okay, I think I agree that everyone has a worldview by that definition.
Right. Now, because of the law of excluded middle, whatever worldview that you affirm explicitly or by implication will by default deny any other worldview. It is a de facto denial of any other worldview. Not simply the non-acceptance, because we're dealing with a worldview which is all-encompassing, as opposed to simply a subset of a state of affairs, which would not be all-encompassing. If I operate from worldview A, then by virtue of that, that is the denial of any worldview that fits under the domain of not A.
Okay, so I don't know if this is going to create a problem for you. What's easier for me to talk about than worldviews would be, again, just like propositions. So I know that there's some propositions that you think we can be agnostic about, like, is there cheese on the moon, as an example you sometimes use. And then there's some propositions, or at least one proposition, that we can't be agnostic about, and that's the one about God existing. So currently, as far as I can tell, I am agnostic about that proposition. I'm not convinced that it's true. I'm not convinced that it's false. So why am I...
Proposition in question, is it a worldview?
I don't think that it's composed of a bunch of other propositions and interrelated beliefs.
Okay.
No, I think it's just a proposition.
Do you accept the creator-creation distinction?
Probably. Just give me a technical definition there.
Yeah, where a creator would be that which is ultimate, absolute, and upon which all dependent facts derive. Creator-creation distinction.
Okay, sorry to be pedantic. That sounded like a definition of creator. I don't want to be pedantic. Is the distinction just that if you have a created object, then there's someone who created it? Like, is that the idea? There's a distinction between something that is created and the being that created it? Because I can agree with that.
Well, when we talk about a fact in question, a fact will either be dependent or not dependent. It'll either be absolute and ultimate or not. Okay? So when we talk about the creator-creation distinction, the creator is that which is ultimate and absolute, and the creation is that which is dependent.
Now, okay, so the language there is weirding me out a bit because I think that the words that might be more common in philosophy would be like contingent and necessary. So are you saying that there's lots of facts that are contingent, but there's some that's necessary, and necessary just means
Yeah,
like
but
true in all
yes,
possible worlds?
yes, yeah. God is the
Yeah.
only thing that is necessarily true.
Okay. Now I find getting into things about necessary truth, that's a bit like I don't know a whole lot here, but it seems to me
But I
like
don't. I
the validity of modus ponens would like the proposition modus ponens is valid is probably like necessarily true. Like I think that's true in all possible worlds as far as I can tell. Unless you think there's a world where well, obviously you don't because of worldview, but
where would
unless
you?
I can't.
How would you be able? How would you be able to when you talk about possibilities? Possibilities and hold on one second. Hold on. I just got to. All right, I'm back.
Okay.
When we talk about possibilities and impossibilities, that's going to be in virtue of whatever we hold is ultimate. Whatever is ultimate or absolute is what defines and describes what is possible or impossible.
Okay, so I think we have a slight disagreement there. So what I take impossible to mean is that it violates logic. Like when I hear impossible, I think usually about logical possibility or physical possibility. So let's just go to logical possibility because it's the easier one.
Well,
So
that is logic. Is logic absolute in of itself?
well, wait one sec. Before we get to that, I just want to define what I mean here, and then I'll answer that. Okay, so by logically possible, all I mean is that it doesn't entail a contradiction. And so, what was your question there?
Well, my definition of possibility means that it's a situation that is provided under the plan of God.
Okay.
Yeah, possibility. See, my view of possibility is that possibility is constrained by whatever is ultimate. Now, in your view, logic is the ultimate.
I don't really know what that means. I'm not sure if that's my view. I'm just saying that I
Well,
think that philosophers or logicians would generally say something that's necessarily true, which is what I take you to mean when you say ultimate.
they're
Is
they're
like
not
the validity of modus
they're
ponens.
not in a position to say anything's necessary.
Okay, well, if we want to move away from that, that's fine. So, what was the last thing you had said there? That I think logic is the ultimate truth. Okay, so all I'm saying, I don't know about the word
What
ultimate.
I
All
just
I mean is that I think it's
just
probably
asked you, do
necessarily true.
you either you accept or you don't accept the creator creation distinction?
Oh, okay. If the distinction, again, I just want to make sure I know what it is. If the distinction is just that if we have a created object, there is the created object, and then there is the thing that created it. I mean, that seems like a coherent distinction to me. Is that what you mean by the
Yeah.
distinction?
No,
Okay.
I'm being more specific. I'm saying that the creator in creator creator distinction entails that which is ultimate, absolute, and personal.
Okay, so I annoy people a lot
As
when
a a
well, one sec. I annoy
No,
people a lot when
you
I
don't annoy me
well,
because you know what, you don't annoy me. Do you know why? It's
I'm not sure.
because you're not being slippery. You're not being devious or disingenuous.
Well, why I'm saying that is because I worry you might perceive me that way. Because what I'm gonna do is
No,
end up
no,
asking a bunch of things like what
I
the.
don't think that at all.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So
But you better watch yourself because I don't want to have to banish you.
yeah, right. Well, I hope not. Okay, so let me just. Okay, so the reason I said that is because when I know that I'm gonna have to ask someone like 5 times in a row what various words they're using mean, sometimes when you do that to people, they get the impression that you're trying to avoid their point by getting into like semantics.
Well, I
So
know where you're coming from, so don't
right,
worry
so
about it.
it's okay. So it's just when you're saying stuff like ultimate and these kind of words, I'm not sure how you mean those things. So we might need to get some clarity there for me to. So the question you're asking is, do I accept the creation distinction? I gave an interpretation of it, which I think makes sense. You say that's not actually what you mean, which is totally fine. Now you're giving an interpretation that invokes words like ultimate and stuff, and I need to know what those words mean, and then I'd be able to answer if I accept the distinction.
Yeah, ultimate meaning that it's simply absolute, non-dependent, eternal, doesn't begin to exist.
Okay, so eternal, I understand what that means. Doesn't begin to exist. I understand what that means.
Ultimate, not, meaning that which cannot be greater or further.
You lost me again with that one. What does that mean?
Ultimate means that which cannot be greater. The only time that applies is when they add it to laundry detergent.
What does greater mean in the case? Like, because
so
we're
infinity.
talking. Well, 1 second. Let me talk to.
It means there is no greater or final or further origin point for something.
Okay, so ultimate it refers to something is ultimate if and only if it doesn't originate from something else. Would that be an okay description?
Something's ultimate absolute if it doesn't begin to exist,
okay.
And it's unconditionally non-dependent.
Okay, and just that language, unconditionally non-dependent. It sounds like what you mean is what most people mean by necessary, but I don't know if that's what you're saying. When you say unconditionally non-dependent, does that just mean?
Well, I specifically avoid the word necessary because people use it in different ways philosophically. So I'm trying to avoid confusion. I'm just saying that the creator is that which is ultimate, absolute, eternal, non-dependent, and personal. Either you accept that or you don't.
Okay, so I just want to make sure, again, sorry to be pedantic, I understand. So I understand what it means for it to be, like timeless or eternal or something like that. That seems clear to me, right? I understand. Well, I'll just go to what I don't understand. What I don't understand is when we say ultimate and absolute. It sounded like you were saying that something is ultimate if and only if it wasn't caused by something else. Like, would that be fair?
If something begins to exist or it's caused, then by definition it couldn't be ultimate. It couldn't be absolute.
Okay, so something, would you agree something is ultimate if and only if it was not caused?
Yeah, it would have whatever is not caused would therefore be eternal.
Okay, all right. So I think I now understand. So the creator-creation distinction is what now?
That which is ultimate, absolute, non-dependent, and personal, and the origin point and creator of all things that begin, and sustainer.
Okay,
the reason why anything exists at all.
Right. Okay. So I think that distinction is coherent. So I think there's a distinction between some like created object, which did start to begin at some point, which was created by someone else, which is contingent, or you like the word dependent, which is dependent on something else to, begin existing or keep existing, versus something that none of those things are the case for it. It didn't start to exist. It didn't have a prior cause, etc. So I accept that the distinction is coherent. I'm not accepting that there is such a being as the creator, but I accept that distinction is coherent, sure.
Do you accept that which is ultimate personal or not?
That which is ultimate has to be personal. Okay, so ultimate is...
Do you accept that?
I'm just talking through it verbally to see if I accept it. So something is ultimate if and only if it wasn't caused. So do I think that all uncaused things are personal? I don't think the laws of logic are caused, and I don't think they're personal. So I think I'd probably have to say no.
Okay. So everyone's going to have in mind something is ultimate, whether they're clear or fuzzy about it, right? That something's going to be, yeah.
Some people,
because if you don't,
there might be people who don't think that, but okay.
Then the consequences are metaphysical intelligibility. It's catastrophic.
Okay, well, I think that
it will annihilate if somebody says, I do not accept that there's anything that is ultimate and absolute.
Well, yeah,
imagine you have a superhero movie where you have like Thanos.
I think
instead of just clicking his fingers and he has half the population of the universe dematerializing, that clicking his fingers, everything that exists ceases to exist. Well, that's an analogy that if somebody says, I don't accept that anything is ultimate, then it's self-refuting, because then you have no intelligibility for any predication.
Okay.
It's self-annihilating.
So I feel like I partially grant this and partially don't. So I think the self-annihilating part probably relies on something called foundationalism being true. So I'm not sure if that's the case. But but I do think that there's pretty crazy consequences if you say, you know, for example, if someone says that I don't think there's anything that's ultimate, going by your definition, but they think the laws of logic exist, then they're going to have to give some account of like how did the laws of logic ever start to exist? What the fuck does that mean? Are you saying there is a pre-logical state or something? So
something would be ultimate if it would be unconditionally non-dependent. If it is not unconditionally non-dependent, then it's not ultimate.
Well,
so the question is, if somebody, like, I called into an atheist radio show in Florida, and they were sitting there singing. Oh, gee, that's
I might have seen it.
Yeah, it was down in Florida.
Was that the old people, or was that the?
Those older guys. Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't. They seemed like kind of like novice.
Well, you know what's funny is the headline of it was, you know, Darth Dawkins abuses old atheists, but you know what? They weren't much older than I am.
Yeah,
so
you are their age. So they should have called it like old people abusing each other.
Yeah. And so they're sitting there talking about the glories of science, and this is how things work, that's how things work. And then I pointed out to him, since you don't accept that God is that which is ultimate, that provides for all dependency, what in your view is ultimate then? And he goes, well, I don't accept that anything is ultimate. And then I pointed out to him, I said, well, if you don't accept that anything is ultimate, then you're not going to be able to have intelligibility for your facts. You know what he said to me? He goes, that's an assertion without a defense. And they cut me off right after that. And that's precisely my point. Without background information, you can have no intelligibility for facts. So the bottom line here is this. You either accept, it's incoherent to not accept the notion that there is something that is the ground of all being. Otherwise, you won't have intelligibility for individual facts.
Now, this might just be my lack of knowledge of the Darth lexicon, but when new terms come up, like the ground of all being, I just need a definition. Is that?
I'm just using different terminology, nuances for the same thing.
Okay.
The ground of all being, whatever is ultimate, whatever is absolute.
Okay, because so here's where I'm at. So if ultimate,
the reason why anything, the ground of all being would be the reason why anything exists at all.
Okay, well, I think that I feel like there is a bit of lack of clarity. Maybe it's my fault on how exactly these words.
I have an important phone call coming in. Listen, I have an important phone call, and I have to take this. I'll try to be back on in about 10 or 15 minutes. Okay,
it's all good. Yeah, if I'm not here, we'll catch up some other time. It's good talking to you, Darth.
Yeah, I'm not running. You're asking a good question, but I gotta take this call.
Okay, have a good one.